And this one will be taking a look at authentication and authorization permissions within Django. So in order to create a user within Django, what we need to do first is to actually create a user using the auto-generated basically UI that Django admin provides. So what we need to do here is just go ahead and create a new user. So the default settings are basically whenever you create a user to actually enter the username and password first for the creation process. So let's go ahead and create a test user here and save the record entry. So whenever you create a user, you'll notice that automatically Django flags the user as active, but one important thing that we need to do is to flag the user as a staff so that they can actually log in. So let's go ahead and save that and log out and log in again and take a look at what happens when we try to log in with the user. So you'll notice that you don't have any permissions, so we haven't actually assigned anything, so that's correct. So what we need to do is log back in as administrator, and what we want to do is assign some permissions to this particular user that we created. So let's go ahead and log back in again, and let's go to the test user. Let's give him a name. We'll just call it test. Last name we just call it test as well, and we'll give it an email, and let's assign some permissions. So the assignment permission process is quite simple. You have on the left side here available permissions. So all permissions are based on whatever models that you have within your application. So within our application here, my AMS, we have quite a few models that we can assign permissions to. So the default comes in 3 actually within Django permissions. Is you can add for each particular model, you can actually add and you can change and you can delete. So you'll notice one important critical thing here is there's no view permissions, which is kind of bizarre actually for Django not to have that, but we'll take a look later on within this video how we can resolve that and actually add one more here so that we can grant certain users read-only permissions. So let's go ahead and assign some permissions to this user. So we'll give them feedback here. We'll be using feedback as our example, and we'll assign these permissions to him, and we just click save here. So once we save, we can log out and log in again, and this time we'll log in as test, and we'll take a look at what test can do now. So test can pretty much do all the CRUD operations on the feedback. So we can do all these things here, and we can also add a new feedback entry here. So that's how we can assign permissions. So how then do we add read-only permissions? So let's log out here and log back in again to admin and take a look at how we can actually achieve the whole permission read-only permission thing. So if we go back to test, what you notice is we don't have the view here. So how do we add a read-only permission? So in order to do that, you actually need to leverage on a third-party application called Django admin view permission. So this is one of the cool things about Django is you have developers who create their own third-party applications, which will allow us to extend Django. So we can leverage on basically this app here called Django admin view permissions. You guys can just look it up within the Git hub, and you can just search for this name, and this the repo will actually appear. So what we can do is we can go ahead and add this application. So the process of adding the application is quite simple. So we just need to add admin view to our installed app. So we'll just copy this out here and head on back to our app, and within the settings.py, what you want to do is just to add this app which will allow us to have view permissions. So once you do that, the next thing that you want to do is you want to basically install the application itself. So what we can do is fire up the pip command, pip install Django admin view permissions. So what I'll do is I'll just fire that up, and the app will be installed. So the next thing, ensure that you run pip freeze requirements so that your requirements file will always be updated. And once we are done with that, we can fire up one more command, which is Python manage migrate. So what we want to do is this particular app for views will pretty much by default, if you don't explicitly specify the models that you want to have views on, it will basically create new permission entries for us. So if we head on over to our auth permissions, and what we want to do is to take a look at all the permissions by default that Django has for us. So what we have here is for all the models that I have the three permissions: add, change, and delete, but we don't have any view permission. So what we want to do is when we fire up the Python manage migrate, what it will do is it will basically call this app that we have here, the admin view permissions, and it will add new view permissions for all the models that we have, since by default we want that to happen without explicitly defining which models to ignore. So let's take a look at what happens when we run Python manage. So when we do that, we can just go back to our database and do a query here. You'll notice that we have a couple more model permissions for view that have been added for each of the models that we have within our application. And when we do go back to our application and refresh, when we refresh the server, you'll notice that a few more entries have been created called view. So let's remove these permissions here and take a look at what happens when we try to give our test user view permission for feedback. So let's go back and look for feedback here. Okay, there we go. So we have feedback, and what we want to do is to, okay, the order is not correct, so here we go. What we're going to do is assign a view permission for feedback for this user. So let's click save, and let's log out and log back in again. So once you log back in, oh sorry, we are actually logging in as test, so not admin. So let's log in as test. You notice that when I click on feedback, I can view all the list of feedback entries that we have within the app. But when I click on each individual feedback, then all the text boxes are read-only. So I won't be able to add or delete, since I can only view the feedback only. So that's how we can basically assign read-only permissions to a user in Django admin. So let's log out and log back in again as our administrator. Okay, once we log back in, you notice there's actually groups here. Groups actually function as a way for us to group our permissions. So now what we've done is we have assigned permissions individually. What we could do is just to create a group, then within the group assign the specific permission. So let's go ahead and do that for our test user. What we're going to do is create a new group. So I'll call this group feedback, read only. So we want to assign just the feedback. So let's look for feedback, read only here. And we want to save. Then what we're going to do is go back to the users and navigate to the test user again. And what we're going to do here is just remove this here. And instead of assigning individual permissions, we just want to assign the group itself. Then what we're going to do, we want to click save. So the concept of group just allows us to basically have more control by assigning users to a group instead of manually assigning them to specific individual permissions. So let's log out and take a look at what test can do now. It should be the same. So let's log in as test. So when you log in, it will be basically the same thing, since he belongs to the read-only group and he can only view the permissions. So that's how we can leverage on Django's internal permissions and pretty much do it out of the box without having to reinvent the wheel. Hope you guys enjoyed this lesson. See you in the next one.